A violent orange glow crackled across the night sky in broken streaks, each line of light slashing the darkness like a sword heated in a forge. Fragments of satellites fell from the heavens, abandoned, half-forgotten relics of a time when humanity sought to conquer space unheeded. Now they returned to Earth in a deadly descent, an arc of fire and metal that promised nothing but ruin. I crouched behind the carcass of an overturned truck, my breath shallow. Even from behind this makeshift shield, I felt the rumbling impact of a satellite fragment plummeting just a half-mile away. The ground shook beneath my feet, the aftershock lurching through cracked asphalt. Moments later, a cloud of radioactive dust whirled on the wind, and I pulled a torn, tattered cloth over my face. I called out to my companion, Morna, who crouched just a few feet behind me. "We have to keep moving. The fallout's going to drift in this direction soon." She nodded, her eyes shining with a bleak understanding. We both knew the dust could kill us just as easily as the flaming debris. Once unthinkable, we had become constant fugitives of the sky, living in fear of what rained from above. Our entire existence revolved around outrunning the next wave of catastrophic landfalls. We dashed between hollowed buildings. Former storefronts still bore the faint outlines of their beginnings. Shattered window frames, tattered posters with half-peeled slogans. My eyes flicked to the brick walls, once proud testaments to human creativity, now riddled with scorch marks. For decades, satellites had orbited overhead. In their prime, they had served everything from international communications to scientific experiments. Yet, in the chaos that followed economic collapse and endless wars, many had been abandoned. Some fell without warning years ago, but the major collisions began in earnest when orbital debris multiplied. Now, the unstoppable wave was gathering speed. By the time the first major crash was noticed, when a 50-year-old nuclear-powered probe shattered above the North American continent, governments lacked the capacity and resources to intervene. Other satellites collided with the first wave of space junk, intensifying the chain reaction. Then, one by one, the rest succumbed to gravitational decay. Like a plague, they scattered across the planet. Inside the building's remains, Morna and I navigated through a pile of debris, twisted rebar, jagged concrete. The place smelled of mildew and death, but we pressed forward. We had learned some tunnels led to sub-basements that might temporarily shield us. The trick was knowing which corner to turn, which corridor to trust. We followed flickering emergency lights that still somehow clung to life-old backup generators or leftover solar panels, feeding them enough electricity to shine. Morna's footsteps halted, her voice hushed. "Over here." She pointed to a half-open door leading to a stairwell. The concrete steps descended into darkness. Our flashlights cut through the gloom, illuminating chipped walls stained with rust-colored streaks. Every so often, water trickled from overhead pipes, the droplets echoing in the claustrophobic space. Carefully, we made our way down 2 flights. The air grew colder, the smell sharper. My heart thudded, half afraid we'd be walking into the lair of scavengers bent on stealing anything we had or worse. But all we encountered was emptiness. Finally, we arrived at a small maintenance room, the door ajar with rotted metal hinges. We slipped inside and locked it behind us as best we could. Morna inhaled sharply, shining her flashlight around the cramped quarters. Shelves lined one wall, laden with dusty cans of paint, rusted tools, and half-melted plastic jugs. The floor was littered with scrap wood and crumpled papers. My gaze caught on a battered red cooler in one corner, a relic of simpler times. She placed her flashlight between us and sank to the floor. "We should wait until morning before we risk going above ground again," she said. "Let the debris cool." I nodded. "Right. If the wind changes, we may need to run again, but at least we'll get a few hours." We settled in, rummaging for something that might serve as makeshift bedding. I found a stack of tarps and handed one to Morna. She thanked me softly, and we quietly arranged them on the floor. Above us, we could still hear low rumbles, the echoes of fresh impacts. Occasionally, the dull roar morphed into thunderous crashes that shook dust from the ceiling. We tried to rest. Nerves made sleep elusive, as did the pervasive fear of radiation. I tossed and turned, mind flicking through images of satellite storms. Images of burning sky and shattered cities haunted my thoughts, until fitful exhaustion finally took hold. When I awoke, Morna was already up, rummaging in the battered cooler. She pulled out a battered can of some unrecognizable brandy peaches from the label and offered me a small metal spoon. Despite the rust around the edges, the fruit tasted like gold. A faint tang still lingered, enough to remind me of sweetness. Once, long ago, I had eaten peaches fresh from an orchard. Now, every bite of something that still tasted vaguely fresh felt like a gift. "How long do you think we can last like this?" Morna asked softly, biting down on a slice of peach. I considered her question. Time always feels fleeting. A fragment could drop anywhere, but if we keep moving, we might survive longer than most. Her voice turned quiet. It's not just the debris, it's what comes after, the sickness. She was right. Radiation poisoning was a common fate for those who tried to scrape out a life under the new sky. We had seen it before, charred hair falling out in clumps, violent coughing that brought up blood, skin splitting in lesions. There were half-forgotten rumors of labs buried in bunkers where scientists worked on solutions, but no one knew if that was fact or fiction. We steeled ourselves to face the day, climbing back up the stairwell. My grandmother used to say, "The morning sun always brings hope." In the New World, sunrise was often blurred by a blanket of ash and haze. When we emerged onto the building's rooftop, we found the horizon painted with dark swirls. The debris from the previous night's crash had left an eerie shimmering dust drifting through the atmosphere. Morna's silver hair glinted beneath the muted daylight. She raised binoculars to her eyes, scanning the city. "I see smoke to the north and fresh rubble near the high-rise on our east side." "Let's avoid the north then," I said, pulling my pack straps tighter. Necessities were few and precious. Water canteens, protective masks, small Geiger counters that occasionally sputtered to life. We also carried seeds in tiny containers, a last symbolic hope. We rarely found suitable soil or uncontaminated ground, but after everything that had happened, you never knew when a miracle might bud. As we climbed down the building's crumbling facade, I realized our vantage point had offered a sobering panorama. The city was a graveyard of twisted steel and collapsed highways. The distant hiss of something ablaze underscored it all. A wind gust carried the faint odor of burnt electronics and scorched metal. We pressed on. Each step took us deeper into the labyrinth of rubble, weaving through shattered blocks. We had a vague plan. Reach the southwestern outskirts where there were rumored to be fewer crashes. So far, each rumor had proven worthless. But we had nothing else to hope for. We soon came upon a wide avenue littered with personal belongings. Backpacks, broken strollers, abandoned suitcases. I picked up a water bottle, the brand label completely faded. It was empty. Morna knelt by a teddy bear with one eye, its fur patchy and singed. She whispered, "These people must have been trying to flee when the satellites hit." I nodded. The overhead power lines drooped, their cables severed and curling on the ground. We were about to continue on when we noticed footprints in the dust. They were faint and scattered, but definitely human. My heart quickened. Others were out here. Following the footprints, we approached a cluster of half-coaxed homes. Morna and I each readied small weapons. She carried an antiquated revolver. I had a battered hunting knife. We weren't killers, but desperation warped all rules these days. Another satellite fragment soared overhead, leaving a glowing trail in the sky. Moments later, we heard a distant crash. The ominous descent never truly paused. We crept into a yard overgrown with weeds, ignoring the white picket fence that now lay flat on the ground. A gaping hole replaced what was once a front door. Broken furniture and glass crunched underfoot. Somewhere in the house's depths, a muffled voice cried out. Morna and I exchanged a glance, then carefully we moved deeper inside. "Hello?" I called, keeping my voice low and non-threatening. "We're not here to harm you." Silence reigned for several heartbeats. Then a rasping reply, "Don't shoot." We edged nearer to the living room, where we found a single occupant. An older man, still strong of build but visibly weary, crouched behind an upturned sofa. He wore a makeshift gas mask and clutched a crowbar. His eyes, bloodshot and wide with fear, darted between us. "We are just passing through," Morna said softly. We heard you. He swallowed, slow and cautious, then lowered the crowbar. I thought you might be bandits. Morna shook her head. No, you alone? Yes, name's Trevor, he said wearily. I've been here since the storms started. Family's gone. Past 3 months back, from the radiation, I subdued a flash of empathy. We all had lost people. I'm sorry, I said, removing my hand from the hilt of my knife. You're still here. Is there a reason you stayed? Trevor fiddled with the mask strap as if the question pained him. The basement's lined with a bit of lead. My father was a collector of nuclear-era memorabilia, had some old suits too. I've been trying to wait out the worst of the crashes, but each day a new wave of them falls. I glanced at Morna, who gave me a subtle nod. She was thinking the same as me. A lead-lined basement could be a temporary safe haven from radioactive dust. Trevor clearly had meager supplies, though. I have some canned goods left if you'd need something, he offered, revealing a guarded generosity. But I'm almost out of water. We only have a little water, said Morna. We can trade. A wary hope flickered in his eyes. I'd like that. Come, I'll show you the basement. I'm about to head down again. These waves of hotspots keep drifting in. We followed him down a narrow flight of rickety stairs. The basement indeed had a thick layer of metal sheets along the walls, stacked in crude patches that he had likely salvaged. A single cot and a flickering lantern were the only furnishings. Trevor rummaged through a cardboard box, producing 2 dented canned scorn and tomato soup. Morna handed over her canteen. We showed him how to rig a small tarp to catch condensation if he could find an uncontaminated spot to place it. Trevor's expression was grateful, but behind that gratitude was a tremor of desperation. Thank you. It's been hard to find anyone not looking to rob me blind. The floor quaked as another distant crash vibrated through the crumbling foundation. We braced ourselves against the wall. Plumes of dust fell from the ceiling. Upstairs, glass shattered anew. Trevor cursed under his breath. Likely more satellites. They don't stop. We huddled in the basement for nearly an hour as repeated echoes of crashing metal filled the world above. Trevor told us scraps of his story. How his wife and daughter had fled with him when the first large satellite fell. How they sought shelter in the city's underground tunnels. Failures in the ventilation system, contaminated water, and lung-searing dust had claimed them both. At some point, the noise overhead quieted again. We emerged upstairs to see the sky thick with swirling ash. Clouds of radioactive dust glimmered faintly, swirling like ghostly snow in the dim light. My Geiger counter clicked sporadically, not yet at lethal levels, but enough to make us wary. Trevor looked out the broken window. I think the fallout's heavier to the east right now. Morna drew a shaky breath. We're heading southwest. Which way will you go? He hesitated. I might try to follow you. Maybe there's somewhere safer. His gaze traveled to the street with unease. We nodded in agreement. A trio is stronger than 2, provided trust holds. We prepared to move out, bundling what few supplies we had. Stay close, I said, realizing I was speaking more confidently than I felt. And watch the skies. Up the road, massive craters dotted the cracked pavement where earlier fragments had landed. Each step was a balancing act over broken slabs of concrete. The city around us was eerily quiet, as though the entire world held its breath between storms. Morna's binoculars revealed a massive chunk of metal resting by a skeleton of a bus stop. There, that must be a satellite fragment. We approached cautiously. Twisted solar panels jutted at odd angles, the metal plating scorched black. An acrid stench hung in the air. Close, I recognized bits of the monolithic device. A communications array, possibly from decades ago. The paint was half-worn, and scorching had whisked away any identifying insignias. My Geiger counter beeped higher near the wreckage. We backed off immediately. Suddenly, a figure darted out from behind the chunk of metal, someone in a ragged suit that covered them head to toe. The figure brandished a makeshift spear, the tip glinting with a chunk of sharpened metal. "Stop! Step back!" the stranger shouted. They sounded frantic, panting heavily inside a respirator that obscured most of their face. "Don't come any closer," I threw my hands up, trying to keep my voice level. "We don't want trouble." Behind me, Morna and Trevor tensed. The stranger twitched, spear shaking in their grip. "You'll bring bandits here. This is my salvage." Morna repeated, searching the area. "That debris is radioactive." "I can still get something from it," the stranger insisted, voice quavering. "Internal components, precious metals. Trade 'em, maybe find radmeds. Doesn't matter if it's radioactive, I'll figure it out." I felt a pang of pity. Desperation had driven them to scavenge from lethal scrap. "It's not worth your life." The stranger let out a strangled laugh, half hysterical. "My life? This is all that's left. What else can I do?" Before I could answer, the stranger coughed violently, doubling over. A rasping wheeze echoed in the respirator. Trevor stepped forward, but the spear shot up again. The stranger's knees shook, and they toppled to the ground in a rattling fit of coughs. Blood dotted the inside of the respirator's visor. Instinctively, I moved to help. The stranger trembled, eyes rolling in panic. I motioned for Morna to hand me a scrap of cloth. The stranger's respirator was broken in one corner, letting in toxic dust. With quick movements, I tried patching it, but the Geiger's urgent clicking spiked around us. Remnants of radioactive dust must have been swirling around that wreckage. We were too close. "We have to move now," Trevor urged, voice trembling. "Or we all get contaminated." I turned to the stranger. "There's a basement shelter, an hour's walk from here. Come with us. We have to leave the salvage." The stranger stared with glassy eyes, still gasping for air. I reached out to pull them along, but they shook their head. A quiet, despairing whisper came from behind the respirator. "I can't leave it. Need supplies. Rad meds." Morna threw up her hands. "This is madness. You'll die here." A cornered look filled the stranger's gaze. "Then I die, with a chance to save someone else. Maybe the next trade." We couldn't persuade them. The Geiger's clicks turned into a frantic chatter. We glared at each other in helpless indecision. Then, with heavy hearts, we stepped back. The stranger was determined, consumed by a desperate gamble. We scrambled away from the crash site, our hearts pounding. The stranger remained there, face buried in the debris. As we retreated, I forced myself not to look back, though the sound of their coughing echoed in my mind. The air seemed a fraction clearer beyond the immediate fallout zone. Though it never felt truly safe, we found a path that skirted collapsed highways and debris-littered fields. Hours passed. The sun, somewhere above the haze, began its descent. Trevor sank onto a broken concrete barricade, wiping sweat from his brow. "We should rest," he panted. "I'm not used to traveling like this." I nodded, scanning for somewhere with overhead cover. We spotted a half-fallen overpass, whose underside might provide shelter. The risk of collapse was real, but so was the risk of staying exposed. We found an area that seemed stable enough. "Set up quickly," Morna said, glancing at the swirling dust. Our throats felt dry. We rationed water, each taking a shallow sip that hardly quenched our thirst. The dryness of the air and the ever-present dust made hydration a fleeting hope. We arranged our meager bedding, none of us speaking. Finally, Trevor broke the silence. "I didn't think I'd cycle back to this. We escaped the city once, only to be forced back underground. It's like the world is punishing us for leaving civilization behind." Morna's gaze flickered in the dying light. "We always thought space was our future. Turns out, we just made it our downfall. We left junk up there and now it's falling back on us." I reflected on memories of an earlier era. Children cheering for rocket launches, news headlines promising Mars colonies, glories of cosmic exploration. Yet for all our brilliance, we had woven our own noose in orbit. One collision led to another, culminating in unstoppable storms of space debris. Some satellites carried nuclear isotopes as power sources. The chain of collisions scattered radioactive fragments across the planet, mocking our naive dreams. Night arrived with a fresh wave of fear. My mind tried to rest, but the constant tension made it almost impossible to sleep. Trevor dozed intermittently, only to jerk awake whenever the wind gusted. Morna's eyes remained open, Scanning the darkness like a sentinel, I tried to reassure myself that with each day we survived we might edge closer to safety, but the question kept gnawing. Was there any safety left? At dawn, the horizon took on a dull reddish glow. Our skin felt grimy and our throats raw. My Geiger counter beeped weakly, signifying elevated radiation, though not yet lethal. We had to keep moving. Dusting ourselves off as best we could, we limped onwards. Every so often a whistling overhead caught our attention, satellite fragments still crashing. Any piece could land within heartbeats, end our journey instantly. Yet we pressed on. Trevor spoke of farmland to the southwest where the land might be less scarred. Some folks had reportedly established clean zones there. Rumors, but we lived on rumors now. Our progress was slow. We forded a shallow drainage ditch. The stagnant water tinted brownish gray with silt. Next, we maneuvered around a collapsed freeway tunnel that had turned into a crater. Morna's binoculars revealed a sprawled meltdown of vehicles. Beyond that, the road opened into a battered industrial district. We paused at the threshold, a wide intersection flanked by empty factories. Broken windows gaped like eyeless skulls. The hush was unnerving. As we contemplated our route, a sudden crash shattered the silence. It came from just around the corner. We ducked behind the shell of a forklift, hearts pounding. Another crash. Then came a roar of some engine or perhaps a generator. Carefully, we peered around the corner. A group of people, 5 or 6, were gathered around a newly fallen satellite fragment. They wore mismatched protective gear, some with respirators and others with bandanas. One of them swung a sledgehammer at the twisted metal. Their leader, a tall figure with a scar that ran from temple to jaw, barked orders. "Pry it open. The core's what we're after. Careful with the radioactive bits. Use the suits." Morna tensed. "Scavengers," she whispered. Trevor's face paled. We should avoid them. I nodded. These were not mere survivors gleaning scraps. They were organized. Tools, suits, maybe weapons. If they spotted us, we might be robbed or worse. But we also needed to pass through. We couldn't go back. Another day's detour would risk more fallout. Our only chance was to slip by undetected. We crept around the perimeter of the factory lot, keeping behind rusted shipping containers. The chatter of the scavengers grew more distant, punctuated by clangs of metal. My heart pounded with every step, certain we'd be noticed any second. But luck held. We reached the far side of the complex. Relief washed over me as the noises faded behind us. Shortly after, we came upon a railway track. It stretched southwest, partially overgrown and littered with debris. A sign, battered nearly to the point of illegibility, indicated the track once led to farmland. Hope flared. We followed the rails, exhaustion gnawing our bones. Dusk arrived another time, swirling with coppery haze. The horizon grew darker, and we realized we faced the risk of traveling at night again. But something pushed us onward. Maybe it was the longing to finally see open land again. A place where we might find untainted air. We stumbled along for hours until we smelled something that made our hearts leap. Water. A faint breeze carried the scent of moisture and greenery. Straining our eyes, we glimpsed vague shapes in the gloom, perhaps bushes or grass. Our boots clacked on the rails until they gave way to a section that had collapsed into a muddy patch. Nearby, a thin stream glimmered in the faint moonlight. Its waters trickled, reflecting starlight in a gentle ripple. Cautious, we tested the Geiger counter. The clicks were minimal, far lower than in the city. Trevor knelt, pressing a shaking hand to the ground. A smile ghosted his lips. "This is better, much better." He lowered himself to the bank and filled a small plastic container. It produced only soft clicks, much safer than we'd grown used to. "We can filter this. We might drink." Morna's eyes brimmed with silent joy. She soaked a piece of cloth, wiping her face. "I didn't think I'd see relatively clean water again." We drank cautiously. Even if it wasn't entirely pure, it was practically heavenly compared to the chalky dryness of the city. Emotions welled up. Relief, sorrow, longing for normalcy. A deep peace seemed to envelop the night, broken only by the distant memory of falling satellites. As we rested there, a faint shimmer traced across the sky. I looked up to see a small flaming streak. Yet, Another piece of space junk. It looked almost like a shooting star. I held my breath, waiting for the telltale explosion. But it burned out in the upper atmosphere, leaving no visible impact. A brief moment of mercy. Maybe not all the satellites had nuclear cores. Maybe some just burned to dust before reaching the ground. Trevor sighed, shoulders trembling. We might have a chance here, if we can find farmland that wasn't struck. His words trailed off, overshadowed by memory of how ephemeral hope had been before. Morna set a gentle hand on his shoulder. We keep going. We survive as long as we can. I nodded, inhaling air that tasted just a bit cleaner. The future was still uncertain. Satellites would continue raining down, storms of fire lighting up the skies for who knew how long. Radiation hotspots would shift, entire areas would be rendered uninhabitable, but we had found a glimmer of respite in this battered swath of land, following an old railroad track to an unknown horizon. Daylight came slowly, unveiling the faint silhouette of rolling hills in the distance. We could just make out the patchy remnants of farmland, a few scattered trees and fields rimmed by ragged fencing. We had no idea what we'd find there, if anything grew, or if it was all contaminated. Yet it called to us with an almost magnetic pull, as if the earth itself insisted on reminding us that life could persist. In that moment, a whisper of faith took root in my heart. Despite the turmoil overhead, maybe humanity could rise again. We had done terrible damage to our world, turned our precious skies into a weapon. Yet in nature's resilience, in the soft flow of a partially untainted stream and the faint green on the horizon, there was a chance for renewal. We trudged onward, step by step. Each crash from the sky reminded us of our fragility, but also of our strength to endure. The fear remained, a constant companion. But kneeling at that little stream, glimpsing the farmland beyond, we chose something else. Forward motion. A decision to search for moments of light amid the falling darkness. We might build a new life, or at least a temporary sanctuary. We might fail. The satellites might keep falling until every last scrap of earth lay poisoned. Even so, as the distant slopes rose to meet us, a quiet resolve steadied my breath. We had found a place where hope, however fragile, might flicker. That hope was enough to carry us onward, through the storms overhead and the endless miles ahead, ready to face whatever came next.